All right. So most people are probably looking at this as, what is this presentation about? The self-state model. What is this? So I actually want to share this as something that I train all my clients in, pretty much all my clients. Not just my clients with same-sex attraction or dealing with homosexuality, but this is something I found to be very helpful for pretty much all my clients, but especially clients dealing with any sort of compulsive issue. So, little background. Let me see if alright, we'll get into it in a bit. On the sheet you'll see some of my own background. I started getting into this type of work with sexual struggles 2006 after I interned at a member ministry of Exodus International. It was a counseling center that specialized in all sorts of sexual issues, not just homosexuality or same-sex attraction. And I got to participate in the recovery groups. They were mixed, so you had guys with heterosexual sex addiction issues, with guys with same-sex attraction, and it was a powerful internship experience. I went from that back to my college, which was and so there's a God school, Valley Forge Christian College. Now it's University of Valley Forge. And we didn't have any sort of counseling services on the campus. We didn't have any sort of support groups. There's nothing for people who are struggling with sexual issues. The mentality of the school back then was very disciplinarian. So if someone struggled or they broke any of the rules of conduct of the school, they wanted them to go to student life in order to get disciplined. And God led me to start up a support group on campus, and I had to deal with some opposition from the school to even start that. And so this was one of the tools I used in my group. Eventually things changed, thank God, with the school, in that the head of the student life department got replaced, and the school then became more open to wanting to actually help students. So even after I graduated, my wife was still a student, I still lived in the area, so I started up a support group for guys who were dealing with pains from their past. It was marketed as like an abuse or trauma recovery group, but every school year, half the guys were dealing with same-sex attraction, the other half dealing with heterosexual sexual addiction issues. And I ran that group for 8 years. Eventually I got my master's, and then I said, hey, I've been giving you guys free counseling for years, why don't you hire me? So I'm the campus counselor there. I'm phasing out though because I'm just involved in so many things. But well, I would do this recovery group, and one of the things we would do would be like an accountability portion, or like a check-in time. We use a lights system to track things. You have greens for what are the good things you're doing, the good things for your health and your recovery. Yellows, what are the trigger areas. Reds, what are the ways you acted out. And so we use that as an opportunity to do analysis of, well, what led up to an acting out experience. So I had this one guy in the group who we were having a discussion one time where he was using like a chat room, or like it was like web TV type of thing, and he was having cyber sex with some guy. And so I was asking him questions like, okay, at the time when you were acting out, or you're tempted to, what were you feeling at that moment? And he just was like, nothing. Like, come on, you had to have felt something. What was going on before you started to act out? And it's like apathetic. I didn't care anymore. And it was just sort of obtuse. And like, it was frustrating me. And then I came across this video by Joseph Nicolosi Sr. And it's a video. It's now his whole channel has been taken off of YouTube. So, but you can find it, I think, now on Rumble. But the video was explaining what he calls the scenario preceding homosexual enactment. I mean, he goes over these different self states. And it's like a light went off for me, like, this explains it. So I'm going to share with you what I've learned from him and how this helps, not just with same-sex attraction, but also when I'm watching, like, well, this just makes sense for just addiction in general. So I teach this to pretty much all my clients. So some objectives for today. We're going to do an overview of Nicolosi's self-state model for the scenario preceding homosexual enactment, but you can also translate this into maybe your own life in ways, or when you're working with someone with any sort of compulsive issue. And we're going to also parallel it to polyvagal theory, which is the big innovative thing in the world of trauma treatment and anxiety treatment. So I'm going to show how there's neuroscience that helps validate Nicolosi's self-state model. And we're also going to parallel it to the different types of threat reactions that we're aware of. And then I'm going to give some practical tips on what to do, what are some necessary responses for each cell state. If you want to learn more, best resource would be Nicolosi's senior's book, Shame and Attachment Loss, the revised edition from 2016. Fortunately, he finished it the year before he died. So chapters 10 through 14 are a full exploration of these topics. So I'm just giving you the condensed version of this. So first, what is a self state? It is essentially just a status of what you're thinking, feeling, desiring, and doing, what your behaviors are. The idea, though, is a self state, a legitimate one, a valid self state, is one that leads to affective competence. One in which you are feeling and dealing. So every emotion has two main functions. They communicate, so our feelings communicate something about how we're assessing the state of our needs, desires, boundaries, our rights, our values, and so they're felt, they're embodied. So I refer to emotions as your body's dashboard for your soul. They indicate what you're assessing. So say, at a very basic level, hunger. Hunger is an emotion. It's like, oh, you feel that ache, you feel that like empty feeling in your stomach, and your stomach's growling. Your body's communicating something. I need fuel. Fill me up. And so then the next thing emotions do is they motivate. So they communicate and then they motivate you to take a certain action to address whatever that particular need is that's being assessed. So a self state is supposed to help you with that sort of affect regulation, to be competent in meeting your needs that the emotions are indicating. And so Nicolosi used this model to explain homosexual enactment, but like I said, this has explanatory power for quite a lot. Just compulsivity in general, but I also teach this, I was teaching this to a client who was going through the grief process after her father died, and helping her realize, oh, there's needs I need to take care of as I'm grieving. So it's just helpful. So, like I said, self states that provide affective competence involve two components, feeling and dealing. Therefore, there are some self states that we'll get into that are considered invalid or illegitimate self states because they're missing either feeling or dealing or both. So, when I say feeling, what am I referring to? Feeling is taking, not just that you have an emotion, you feel it, but it's more active. It's when we're feeling our feelings, we're taking conscious ownership of your internal emotions. You're identifying them. You're also containing them. So to feel doesn't necessarily mean that you're exploding with anger every time. Well, I'm just feeling angry, so I'm just going to explode at people. No. You can feel it without expressing it indiscriminately. So you're just able to identify it and contain it, and then you use wisdom in what you do with it next. Dealing. Usually it's going to involve honestly expressing your emotions and your needs. And doing what's necessary to meet the needs that the emotions are indicating. So it's going to involve verbalizing, describing, sharing, initiating a solution. Feeling and dealing are the preconditions for the self-states of vitality and empowerment. And like I said, invalid self-states are missing feeling and or dealing. So, you'll have a handout that has the main self-states that are involved in the scenario preceding homosexual enactment, or just in general with compulsive issues. I'm going to start with these main ones and show the main ones we're working with here. Assertion, shame, gray zone, and Nicolosi called the last one homosexual enactment, but because I deal with so many other issues, I just call this acting out. And then there's grief. That's set up like that for a reason, so I'll explain. So first, assertion is the first valid self-state. When you're in the self-state of assertion, you're feeling and dealing.
Excuse me, what is the title of this again? What is this?
The self-state model.
These are all the self-states that you can have?
These are the ones that there may be more, but these are ones we're dealing with, especially when it comes to compulsive issues. But I do have some ideas So I'm still mulling over and contemplating some things, because I would say a lot of this is more particularly helpful for male compulsive issues. Because assertion is most associated with masculinity. Receptivity is more associated with femininity. And so there's times when I'm working with a female, her self-state that she might need to work at getting into is receptivity. But there are times women also need to develop their assertiveness. So it depends on the situation with each client, where I'm seeing that they need to work out more. So my basic definition for assertion is it is the authentic expression of the self. So you're authentically feeling your feelings, you're authentically expressing your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, and when it comes to your behaviors, you're being the active agent. So when you're in your self-state of assertion, you're not just saying, well, let's say I'm lonely, and I feel so lonely. I hope someone will come by and want to spend some time with me. No, if you're in your self-state of assertion, I'm feeling lonely, well, let me initiate, let me be the active agent in my life to make that need. I'm going to do something about it. So you're not going to be passive. Passivity is going to be the opposite of assertion. You're not just expecting things to just happen for you. You're going to go and do what is meaningful for you. And this helps facilitate what we call an internal locus of control. So who's familiar with locus of control? So it's the theory about what has control over your decisions. And there's two types of loci of control. Internal and external. So internal is that ultimately I have a say in what I do in my life, what I decide to do, how I deal with the situations I'm facing. External locus of control says, is all these outside forces or things that I cannot help, they decide what I do in my life. And good clinicians should be aware that, because right now we're dealing with all this wokeness that actually is affirming that people have no power over themselves and that it is external forces that keep you from living a meaningful life. But the reality is the locus of control that is most associated with having good mental health and being prosperous and actually excelling is the internal locus of control. Having the external locus of control is most associated with depression and anxiety. So getting to that self-state of assertion helps facilitate and nurture having an internal locus of control, that there's something I can do about my situation. And like I said earlier, the assertion is the core of masculinity, and that's why I believe that this is so vital for clients with same-sex attraction issues to be familiar with. So I train them up in this, and there's things I do to help enforce it even in the therapeutic frame. So I'll get into that near the end. But this is the thing we notice. I'll ask clients to test this out, after I teach them this whole concept, or if they come to me, maybe it'll be prompted by them sharing a time they acted out, and I'll walk them through these self states and help them make the connections themselves. But once people start to identify times where they've been in a self state of assertion, they notice like, well, I'm feeling like connected with myself. Like there's not a disconnect between my thoughts and my behaviors and my feelings and my behaviors. Like I'm actually, everything's in cohesion together. I'm well connected with others because one of our basic needs is for community and for connection with others. So I'm actually being active in meeting those needs. And so we're like, well, when I'm in that state, I'm meeting my needs actively and I'm authentically expressing what I think and feel, and how when someone offends me or they do something, I express to them or to someone else who's safe. I'll get into that a little bit more. And I get that connection, I get that understanding, I'm meeting that need. The same-sex attraction really doesn't have a pull. When I'm in a self-state of assertion, temptation isn't so tempting. So, what then makes it tempting? Oh, actually, we'll get into it in a little bit, but first, let me talk about, when we talk about emotions, you can categorize emotions a lot of different ways. For our purposes, there's two ways we'll categorize them. Expressive emotions and inhibitory emotions. The self-state of assertion is most associated with the expressive emotions. And these may include emotions that we often consider as negative emotions, like anger and sadness, but what it has in common with other things like joy, excitement, love, alertness, enthusiasm, is that they're all emotions that are outwardly expressed, and they involve proactive movement. They motivate you to take action in some way. For example, with anger, the emotion that comes up when you identify a threat to your boundaries, your rights, your progress, and so it motivates you to fight against that threat. Sadness is realization of a loss. It motivates you to grieve, cry, to express your sorrow in some way, your pain in some way. Love. Love is more than an emotion, obviously, but it's an action, so it's cohesive, that when you love, you want to do good for someone else. So they're all about outward expression and goal-oriented behavior. So when you're in that self-state assertion, you can feel a wide range of emotions. You're going to deal with them appropriately, but you'll notice they're mostly going to be categorized by these emotions. So what takes us out of being assertion will be the other self-state of shame. But shame is not a valid self-state, because it's one in which you're feeling, but you're not dealing. So it's the belief, shame is sort of a mega category for a lot of negative thoughts and feelings. At the core, shame is about disconnection. Belief that one is unworthy of belonging and of purpose. And there's all these other lies that are associated with shame. So one of these days I'll probably do a little deeper dive into just what shame is and how it impacts us. What precedes shame will be a double-bind experience. So a double bind is a no-win scenario. Even if it's just mental, maybe not actually experience a double bind, but you're anticipating one or you're thinking of one. The idea is if a valid self-state is when you're feeling and dealing, the double bind is where you think, well, if I feel something, but if I deal with it, I'll make things worse. So, for example, my friend said something really insensitive to me, I feel hurt. But if I tell him I feel hurt, he'll think I'm a big baby. So I stuff it. I don't tell him what I really think and what I feel. So that's the double bind. I feel bad, but I'm not going to say it. Or it could just be regular life. Like you wake up on a Saturday and you really just want to sleep in. I want to get some rest. But then you're thinking about all the stuff you got to do. I can't deal with whatever. My body's saying sleep more. But I'm also thinking I got all this work to do. And you don't listen to your body. You don't express it. You just stuff, well, that tired feeling, I'm just going to stuff it down. And then you're miserable throughout the rest of your day. So you see this, we trace it back to these sort of experiences. So what that does, it causes a disconnect within yourself, where you're feeling but not dealing. So the disconnect within you, but especially when it involves other people, because shame is typically a social emotion. It's about how what your standing is, what your status is among others. There's then a disconnect, or at least a perceived disconnect between you and others. And it could just be anticipatory. So you anticipate a double bind. You're not actually experiencing it. So perhaps you've been invited to go to a party. Maybe you're a guy, you've been invited to go to a Super Bowl party. And you're like, I don't care about football at all. I don't know what I'm going to do there. And like, okay, well, so you're anticipating you're not going to fit in. So it's like, I kind of want to go, I want to hang out with the guys, but I'm going to feel weird, I'm going to feel awkward. So it hasn't actually happened. You haven't been rejected yet, but you're anticipating it.
You know my life.
There you go.
You speak my language.
So nervousness is usually anticipatory shame, and that's a double bind experience. And the experience is usually too intense to handle for long. So shame self-state is usually like a shame moment. It's so overwhelming that you either resolve it quickly or you move into the next self-state. So some differences between assertion versus shame. When you're in assertion, you have affective expansion. You're expressing yourself openly. You're emotionally open. You feel like free in your chest, and you feel like there's an openness and a lightness when we're in our self-state of assertion. You're relationally connected. Whereas in shame, you're relationally disconnected. And you're emotionally closed, you're constricted. The body also expresses shame in certain ways. You usually see when someone's in shame, they hide their face, hide their gaze, they hunch over. There's a gripping in their chest, like a pulling down. So when I ask people, I do a lot of body work, when you're saying you feel something, go to your body, what do you feel? That helps them get to connect with their emotions, and they help them realize, oh, this feeling in my body is associated with this emotion. Assertion is a vitality affect, whereas shame is an inhibitory affect. So we have certain shame-based reactions. I got a lot of this, so I combine different sources, so not all of this is stuff that you'll get from Nicolosi's book, but a lot of this is from Dan Allender, especially The Wounded Heart. So when we're feeling shame, especially when we're anticipating rejection, we withdraw, we avoid. It's a very common shame-based reaction. Another one is we wear masks. We put on a persona, we put on an act. It's taking on a false self. With guys with same-sex attraction in particular, there are certain masks that are very common to see. One is what we call the good boy image. He learned to be passive and docile and nice. I hate nice. Nice means just being agreeable just to get along and be accepted. Nice is not nice is not the same thing as being kind.
Correct.
So nice is about getting approval. You might have to be passive or just go along to get along. And so the good boy is always, oh, I never cause any waves, mommy. All right, I'm passive, and also like I have a blob in a way. You see the nice guys, the good little boy persona is almost like he never asserts himself. He never speaks up. He never disagrees with mom. And so that's the mask he had to put on to survive in that home environment, to get the love he thought he needed to get. The flamboyant false self. It's the exaggeration of being more feminine, and it's like a mask they wear so long that they don't know how to turn it off at times. So you could also see the false self with women when they put on more of the stud, lesbian false self, the veneer to keep themselves protected, that mask. This is what it takes now to get the respect, the clout that I may need. Then there's contempt, and contempt is hostility. And there's two types of contempt. There's self-focused contempt and others-focused contempt. So contempt is when you are now aware, you're conscious of the thing about yourself that you're ashamed of, and you attack it. And or you attack the people that have become aware of it, even if they only became aware of it inadvertently. You know, someone could just like notice something about you. Maybe, for example, you got someone like that, a guy with the gay lisp, and you misunderstood what he said. Oh, can you say it again? The way he said, I couldn't tell what you said. And he's like, interprets it as, oh, it's because of my lisp, and beats himself internally. Or, for example, I got a guy I'm working with for years. I've worked with this guy, and he's really tall, probably as tall as Grant. He's like 6 something, and big dude, but high-pitched voice. And so it's a tell. So he's in college, he's at the cafeteria, and he's talking, and there's some other girl at the table, and she's like, oh, are you gay? Like, blows up his spot, and just like this, and of course he's dealing with same-sex attraction, and the contempt he felt, he lashed out at her, and like, starts yelling at her in some way, but he's showing contempt to her because of the contempt he has for himself. Okay? I can go into this on and on. But those are the 3. Withdrawal, mask, and contempt are some of the most common shame-based reactions. So like I said, the shame self-state is so powerful and overwhelming that we don't stay in it very long. It's more of a shame moment, and if we don't resolve it quickly, we then move into the gray zone. And the gray zone is really like a prolonging of the shame state. And in this, it's really another invalid self-state because you're neither feeling nor dealing. It's more of a mood state. And so when we go into shame, let me actually backtrack a little bit. With shame, it's a shutdown. Okay? When you're having that anticipation and that of threat from the double bind experience, you feel like you're in danger from that double bind, it overwhelms you, so you just shut down. And that's the shame. It's this. So gray zone is a prolonging of that. You can be in the gray zone for a few minutes, or a few hours, days, weeks, months, years. I've worked with some clients who I live in the gray zone. I don't know any other way but being in the gray zone. It's a pervasive state of disappointment with vague and undefined frustrations. You know, people say they're irritated, but they don't know the cause. Gray zone. They have hurt feelings. They're passive. They're lonely. they're feeling blah, you know, that signs, all right, you're in the gray zone. It's the opposite of assertion. The person then assumes a passive posture regarding their needs, just hoping things will happen, but they don't put any work into it. And they perceive themselves as trapped, stuck, helpless, hopeless. And essentially it's like a type of depression. And so they're in a very low mood. And essentially, the gray zone is a defense against grief. Because to address wounds and losses would be so painful they don't want to feel it at all. So they shut down emotion. So they might be feeling certain emotions, but they're not feeling the anger or the sadness associated with any pains. In the gray zone, it's going to be associated with the inhibitory emotions. Shame, fear, anxiety, apathy, boredom, numbness. All the emotions that they inhibit in two ways. They inhibit action, and they also inhibit awareness of the other emotions, like anger and pain and sadness. So they keep you in this stuck state. And keep you from pursuing positive goals. But we don't want to just stay in this blah state, feeling numb and blah and depressed. We want to feel good at some point, right? So that leads to acting out. I want to feel good, but I also don't want to do the work to actually meet my needs adequately. So I want to do the work as passively as possible. So when you're in the shutdown and you're in the gray zone, you assume a consummatory posture. So what do? We scroll on our phones mindlessly. We binge eat food. We look at porn. There I can get the sense of intimacy without actually doing the work of intimacy with a real person. We do something risky. We just sort of shut down our thoughts and our wisdom, our discretion, and do something crazy. So we act out. It presents as an escape from that low affect and loneliness of the gray zone. And so in that passivity, we just take a consummatory approach. We desire positive feelings without the work involved in addressing our true needs. So it's like a pseudo-assertion. We think we're being assertive, we think we're feeling and dealing, but you're not really dealing with real issues. It gives you the illusion of a solution. So what's the way back? So normally what happens is I deal with a client and they tell me I just acted out. Okay. Now on top of it, if they acted out in a way that they're trying to change, they just had a gay hookup or they looked at porn again, now they just do something that they're trying to change. And one of the other lies of shame is there's something about me that's defective at my core and I cannot change it. It's one of the other lies of shame that helps drive addiction. So when you just act it out again, that message comes, oh, here's evidence now that I can't change. So the acting out just feeds back into your shame, and so it becomes a cycle of act out, now I'm ashamed again of what I just did, compounds the shame that was already there at the start, and then I go back to the gray zone, act out again, and it becomes addictive. Okay, so what we do is we identify the shame moment. Like, let's trace it back. It's like, all right, when did the urge to act out start? What day was that? You acted out Saturday morning. Okay, how were you feeling when you woke up Saturday morning? Like crap. Or like, okay, so something must have happened already, even the night before. What happened Friday? How were you feeling Friday when you woke up? I was feeling pretty good Friday. Okay, how were you feeling by the time you went to bed? I'm miserable. Okay, something happened in between. So what happened? What did you do during the day? Well, I met with a friend, we had coffee, and I kept looking at my friend as we're talking, and he kept looking down at his phone. And then I just sort of felt weird after that. I felt awkward, and I just stopped sharing with him what I was talking about, and we just moved on. I'm like, did you ever address it? No? Oh, okay. And then what was your mood like after that? Well, just, and then I had the idea to look at porn later, and I tried to fight it, but then I woke up and I was still feeling blah, so then I looked at the porn Saturday morning. Okay. All right. So, where was that shame moment for you? Where was the moment of disconnect? Yeah, with his friend. It's supposed to be connecting with his friend, and the friend is sending a signal to him that he's not interested in what he's saying. And so it says, I'm not worthy. I'm not interesting. What I have to say doesn't matter. And then he put himself in a double bind where, well, I feel bad about this, but if I speak up, it's not going to be worth it. Either it'll make things worse or it just won't help at all. So I stuffed it down. But your negative feelings just don't disappear because you stuff them. Came back in another way. So we identify the shame moment there, and so we have two solutions. All right, I call one the higher path, and that's to double loop. And then the other path is what I call the lower path. So this is the final version of the self-state model that you have in your handouts. So what is a double loop? Well, the double loop is to undo the double bind. All right, if assertion is to feel and deal, to authentically express yourself, but the double bind is saying, well, if I express myself, I'll make things worse, then to double loop is to reality test that. Well, will you make it worse if you express yourself? So there's actually 3 levels of double looping. All right, top level double looping is going to have the greatest risk, or greatest chance of harm, but also the greatest reward. And that's where you go to the source of the shame moment. So for that example, going to that friend who wasn't listening as you were talking with him, and share with him, when you did that, this is what I felt. You helped connect his behavior to your feeling. And if an effective double looping will involve that friend listening, showing and demonstrating understanding and acceptance. So that person hears like, so when you're saying like, when I was looking at my phone, you felt rejected, you thought I was rejecting you, and you felt hurt. Yes, I understand. And maybe there's an apology involved. Sometimes, some situations are just perceptions. And so apologies may not necessarily be needed, but at least the understanding. The key thing is to get that understanding and acceptance from the other person. So that's top level looping. That like, well, there goes the shame. It's resolved. That's not always possible or feasible. Some people are like, no, my dad, I can't talk to my dad about this stuff. Some people you go and talk to them, hey, when you did this, I felt this, and they'll just double down and be like, well, you need to grow up, stop being a big baby. It's like, and so, oh, they proved my fear. It really did make things worse. Now I feel like even worse. So I don't recommend that top level double looping for every situation. You have to use discretion. Sometimes you get to the point where like, you know what? I deserve to stand up for myself either way. But you've got to get to that point where you have enough ego strength, you know, and a support system as well. Don't be out there like a lone ranger confronting people if you don't have people that you can talk to that can help support you afterwards. So to me that's not feasible. So mid-level double looping is medium risk, medium reward. And that's to go to another person who's not associated with the situation, not to triangulate them, but to express to them what you're experiencing and how you're feeling in reaction. And for that person to show understanding and acceptance. And for guys, the recommendation is another male, someone that you respect and you admire. You know, whoever is the problem population for you. Some women, it's like they're already dealing with like emotional codependency, so go to a guy then maybe. But for a lot of women, there is a difficulty with connection with women, so go to a woman that you respect and admire. When it's someone you respect, then there's still a little bit of risk with it. There needs to be some risk, so that you can overcome the fear. A lot of guys, they grow up with their mom feeling so comfortable with their mom. Oh, I talk to my mom about everything. Well, then stop going to her with your problems.
Yeah.
Go to your dad now, who's always been waiting in the wings, but he just hasn't connected with you well, but he's willing to, if that is the situation. And so, Dad, try to initiate more. Try to show that you're willing to talk more. Or maybe just a guy friend or a guy mentor. So you gotta figure out who's feasible to do this with. And if someone like that is not available or they're busy at the moment, then at the very least you can do low-level double looping, and that's low risk, low reward. So some people will do this, but it still didn't fully help. It still acted afterwards. Like, well, remember that's low reward. It helps, but it might not be adequate all the time. So I usually say you do low-level double looping regardless, because it really helps to do this first, and then you also try to do one of the other double looping as well. So what low-level double looping is, you double loop yourself. You take a moment, you do some introspection, you do some journaling, or you just like, let me understand what just happened, what I'm experiencing, why I'm feeling that, and show some curiosity and compassion for yourself. And the great thing is too, especially when I'm working with my Christian clients, is you're never really doing it alone. Even when you're doing that low-level double looping, you're still doing it with God, so He can bring revelation to you. So what happens as you do the double looping, it brings you back into assertion. Because now you've actually felt, and dealt. Now sometimes as you're doing the double looping, it brings up another pain. It brings up a deeper wound. Or maybe it is what the situation was such a deep wound that you have to do the lower level double looping and go through grief. Grief. Grief is the other valid self state. You're feeling and dealing. It's allowing yourself to feel and express the pain, sadness, anger over a loss or a deficit. And maybe through tears, not always, but tears are healthy because when you cry, you're releasing toxic neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
All the stress hormones that build up when you're in a threat state, they're released when you cry. And so it releases that stress toxin. It brings healing. Now you can grieve, do grief work by yourself, in alone time with God. You can grieve with another person. Whatever you need to do. A little bit of both. And what you're doing is you're showing compassion to that hurt part of yourself. And it may be the younger part of you that's coming up, memories that are coming up. And you need to show compassion to that part of you. And even though it's the lower path, I call it the lower path because it's so painful to do the grief work. But in the end, it makes your assertion even stronger. Because now you have evidence that I've gone through the worst of it. I can handle it now. Now, a little bit of note about tears. Tears over a loss that has not occurred are from despair or fear. When you're crying, like I have a client who has a lot of anxiety, and he just anticipates something bad happening, but it hasn't happened. He starts crying over that. That's not healing for him. He never feels good after that type of crying. It's when he goes back to a wound and he cries after that he feels better. Because there's no end to tears about things that could happen in the future. Because there's no end to things that could happen in the future. But there's a finite amount of tears for things that happened in the past. So you may have to keep going to that well, but eventually it's like I can look back at that wound and it doesn't bring up tears anymore. So let's bring in polyvagal theory. I hope I'm not going to, oh gosh. I'm going to wrap this up as quickly as possible. So the latest innovation in trauma treatment originated with Stephen Porges, and it's referring to the vagus nerve, V-A-G-U-S, so not Vegas like Las Vegas. It's called vagus because Vegas is the root word to vagabond. So it's the longest nerve in the human body. And the theory is that it's what helps regulate the parasympathetic nervous system. So in your autonomic nervous system, who knows what it is? It's like, that's the part of the nervous system, of course our PT knows, yeah, is what regulates all your automatic functions. So autonomic, think automatic, all the things that are necessary for you to survive. There's two parts of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, sympathetic, think feeling. So sympathetic is active, it's about you moving, getting needs met, usually to help you survive. Okay, to deal with threat, but not always. Whereas parasympathetic is about stopping, slowing, resting, digesting. Okay? So there's two main branches of the vagus nerve that are supposed to help with that parasympathetic nervous system. First part is the ventral vagal complex. It's part of the vagus nerve that goes into your heart and lungs. And that's what helps bring us into homeostasis, our resting and digesting state. We're most relaxed, we're most at ease. Then there's the dorsal vagal complex that goes down your back and into your gut, into your pelvis, and it ends at your perineum. And that, well, we'll get into that. So, right here is a typical polyvagal chart. So you have a handout with this chart. And what you'll see,
Oh, I have it.
so what you'll see there is that green section is homeostasis. That's the ventral vagal complex. And when you're in that state of homeostasis, you feel joy, you're in the present, you're grounded, you're feeling compassion, you're curious, you're open. But the big thing is, one of the big things that helps us get into homeostasis is social engagement. Especially when you're growing up, we have mirror neurons that as you're growing and you're a little child, you're trying to figure out what's safe, what's healthy, what's good. So a baby has no point of reference except for mom, for example. So let's say that baby's with mom at the kitchen table and a spider falls on the table. If mom reacts to that with fear, the baby is picking up, because baby doesn't know how to react to that. Baby's mirror neurons are judging how to react based on what mom's reaction is. So if mom reacts calmly, baby goes, oh, I don't have to be scared of that. Okay? She can contain herself like, all right, let's just shoot away or whatever. So what helps us is when we can co-regulate with someone. Someone else can come along and they're calm, they have a calm nervous system, and they're around us. When we're all activated, we can have a calm nervous system as well. So this line here is the sort of the breach into sympathetic nervous system activation, where now you're either in a threat mode or you're being active. Because in here, in ventral vagal complex, you're resting and digesting. There's not a whole lot of activity here. So that squiggly line is actually the ideal. The ideal is that we are going through motions of sympathetic nervous system activation, responding to needs, taking action, and then resting. And then responding to needs and resting. So the ideal is not to stay constantly in a, like, just sleeping all day, not doing anything meaningful. Like, you're going to die. You'll die because at some point you need to get up and make yourself some food and eat. Or go out to work and make some money so you can make some food and eat. You know, like, you can't just be resting and digesting all day long. So the ideal is actually that squiggly line. But the problem is when that line going into sympathetic nervous system activation doesn't go down. And the energy starts going up and up because you're still perceiving a threat of some sort. So we have some of our most common threat reactions. Most of us are familiar with fight or flight, right? But there's actually 5 threat reaction types. So you have, I usually say fight or flight, but this chart has flight first. So you have flight. This is anxiety, there's levels to it. You got worry, anxiety, fear, panic at the top. And then that's the whole idea is, with these 3 threat reactions here, the main idea is that I can do something about the threat I'm facing. There's something I can do about it. So in flight, that is, I can flee from the threat, I can avoid it. Fight is, I can do something about it by moving to the threat and conquering the threat, defeating the threat. And so there you feel frustration, anger, rage at the top. Fawn is, I can move with the threat. I can appease the threats. I can, can't beat them, join them. And so, if I can please the threat, then I'll be safe. But if that energy keeps going up and it breaches that barrier, it goes from I can do something about the threat to I can't do something about this threat. And that's where we go into freeze, where you just shut down. You're overwhelmed. And you start dissociating, you have numb, you're depressed. And that's where the dorsal vagal complex comes in. And it brings in an emergency shutdown. So whereas the ventral vagal complex, it brings you to homeostasis, and you're resting and digesting, dorsal vagal shuts it down. So it's like, slam, stop, we're in too much danger. We're too overwhelmed, too much energy, we need to shut things down. So you go into freeze, and if you stay in that state too long, you're in flop. You're just feeling blah, it's just like lethargic. To me, that flop state is why we see so much depression and anxiety combined. People with anxiety, they get overwhelmed to the point they shut down, they're now depressed. They've run out of energy because of all the energy they expend with their sympathetic nervous system. And that's also where addiction tends to happen. So, maybe you're making the connections here to the cell state. So, the assertion is that squiggly line, where you're being active and then you're resting, you're beating your knees, and then you're chilling out. So, and the dull bind is that sympathetic nervous system activation. So in that, those fight, flight, or fawn, there's different types of dull bind and anticipatory shame reactions happening. And that shame is equivalent to the freeze state, the initial breach into I can't do anything about this, and I need to shut down. And gray zone is that flop state. So the extent of staying, that dorsal vagal shutdown. And then acting out, that's going into addiction. Now there can be times just in the sympathetic nervous system where you have breaches of your integrity and you act out in some way, but it becomes more addictive when you're really shut down. And so double looping, well, that's the same thing as the social engagement. So I have another version of the polyvagal chart with the different cell states there, so you can see how it maps on. So what are some things to take note of? So homeostasis is maintained by moderation of sympathetic nervous system activation. Doing meaningful activity, even fun and pleasurable ones, involve a degree of stress. even if you're playing a video game, even a silly game on your phone, I like to play Minesweeper on my phone. There's a little bit of stress involved. If I hit this button, I might hit a bomb, you know? So even something that's fun, if you're playing a game there's no threat at all in the game, you're going to get bored. So we need threats, even for things that are pleasurable. We need some stress. You know, you're trying to give someone an assignment, and you tell them, just get it done wherever. No deadline. Are they going to get it done? No. Deadlines are important. Otherwise, you're not going to do anything. So, social engagement facilitates homeostasis through co-regulation, which requires self-assertion and courage. Now, the trouble is, for our SSA clients, is the anticipatory shame. They want to connect with someone so they can co-regulate, but they're worried that they'll be rejected. And so that's where we have to work with them to ease into it. And so, shame, you have fight, flight, fawn. Well, what is fight? That's contempt. The different shame-based reactions we talked about earlier, the fight reaction is the contempt reaction. Flight is withdrawal. Fawn is putting on the false self. And so, but you can only do those for so long before you get overwhelmed. You go into a shame state or a flop state. So when the sympathetic nervous system gets overwhelmed, the dorsal vagal shuts down. I already talked about this. So it's all equivalent to everything I was sharing with the cell state model. So we have neuroscience to back up what Nicolosi was talking about years ago. So we want to self-regulate. So when we're in the shame state, we want to use double looping for when we're in these fight, flight, fawn, and freeze mode. There's still a chance when you're in freeze to help the person double loop. But the first thing is, you gotta down-regulate. Because when you're in that activation, you've got all this energy rising, and you need to relax the body. So, a lot of times I'll start a session with a client, they want to tell me about something, but they're like, I'm feeling so nervous talking about it. Now, would it be wise for me to say, just go ahead and say it, it's safe? No! Like, alright, I had a client, this happened the other day, she was ready to talk to me about something, but you can see it's building up. I'm like, alright, let's take a moment, relax the body. Alright? Relax, get to enough relaxed state, now share with me, if you're ready. So, I find it helpful to actually reconceptualize same-sex attraction as a threat reaction. In fact, we have studies that show that same-sex attraction is associated with higher amygdala activation. So the amygdala is a part of the brain that assesses for threats. And so they have brain studies that show men who are considered heterosexual looking at porn of women, heterosexual porn, versus gay-identified men looking at homosexual porn. And we see the difference between them, that the gay men looking at homosexual porn have higher amygdala activation. So that could be explained, we don't know exactly, but it could be explained by how the same-sex attraction arousal experience is associated with fear, shame, pain. Now, if someone is in the gray zone, what I do then is you actually have to get them out of deactivation. They're already shut down, they're deactivated. So you actually have to get them energized a bit by getting them to do some activity that is not too strenuous. Go for a walk. It might not be physical activity either. Read, pray, journal, but not something passive and consumatory, like watch TV. That'll help boost your mood. No, do something that requires some degree of effort. And then in therapy, I reinforce the assertion. I think this is my last slide. I require clients to have a goal each session. Either a goal, or at least they have to bring in what they want to work on. This has multiple purposes. One, it counters their tendency toward passivity. When you have clients with same-sex attraction especially, they're typically out of their assertion, and they're in that passive state. So requiring that they have a goal means they have to be thinking consciously about what do they want. They got to get in touch with their desires, their feelings, their needs, and express that. Sometimes they're so disconnected, they don't know what to say. So I get clients that get frustrated with me. You always want to bring up a goal. It's for your own good to do that. Also, that protects me against threats or accusations of being coercive. Because that's one of the main accusations against my field, is that we coerce clients to work on things they don't want to work on. Well, they bring the goal to me. So I use a cab driver analogy. I tell clients, I'm the cab driver, you're the passenger, you tell me where you want to go, and I figure out the best way to get us there. And if they're like distressed, they don't know how to tell me what they want to work on, that gives us actually something to work on. Well, that's what we're going to work on then. And so I teach clients what I call the 3 C's. To be curious, be compassionate, and then coach themselves. A lot of times we try to coach ourselves through anxiety. Just buck up, just get it done. But we don't start being curious about, why am I anxious? Why am I feeling threatened right now? And then showing compassion to that part of you. You can't really coach yourself to have courage when you don't do those first 2. So, there we go. Thank you guys.
Excellent.
This is really good presentation.